Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for everyone. Welcome to the session titled Non-Commercial User Constituency Rule in Safe Internet. It's part of IGF 2024, which focus on advancing human rights and inclusive in the digital age. It's organized by Lebanese Cyberspace Association. My name is Amin Hasha, and I am honored to moderate this session and the discussion. I will give now Pedro for a short introduction as his online moderator. Please, Pedro.
Hi everyone, I'm Pedro Lana, also part of the Non-Commercial Users Constituency. I will be moderating online, so please feel free to ask questions or make comments in the chat. If you want them to be read aloud, please just indicate it in the message. And I hope we all have a good session. Amin, back to you.
Thank you, Pedro. This session focuses on essential understanding role of non-commercial user in fostering a secure and inclusive internet. Our speakers today will guide us through this conversation, and together we'll explore the challenge and success of non-commercial user advocacy, share regional case, and try to identify actionable strategy to create and to keep a safer and more inclusive internet. I encourage all of you, both in the room and online, to actively engage with our panelists and bring your experience to this conversation. Let us seize this opportunity to connect, collaborate, and amplify the voice of non-commercial users as we work together a truly inclusive digital future. Let's start the turn with our first speaker, Van Serve. I want to thank most of the speaker now. It's morning time and for giving from your time in this early morning in your side. Van Serve is the Vice President and Internet Evangelist of Google. I will give you the floor, please.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to join you today. As I think about the non-commercial users, I think about all the other users, and I think much of what you want is what everyone else wants too. You want a safer internet, among other things. I bring you greetings from the leadership panel. I can tell you that it is our hope that the IGF will continue beyond 2025. As you know, the next meeting is June in Oslo in Norway. We have communicated to the Secretary General of the UN that it's our hope that the World Summit on the Information Society plus 20 will renew the mandate of IGF to continue for another decade. I also would say that it's our belief that the IGF can be an important element of the Global Digital Compact, in the sense that we have for the last 19 years been evaluating the access to the internet and its utility and reliability. And the Global Digital Compact will need to be scrutinized for its successful implementation. There is no better place than the Internet Governance Forum for that evaluation and analysis. I will start out by saying that as I look at safety in the internet, I've come to believe that there are two very important elements that need to be part of our universe. One of them is accountability, and the other one is agency. Let me explain. If we're going to have a safe internet, it is vital that the parties who are using the internet and providing internet services and applications be accountable for their behavior. That's true of individuals, it's true of organizations, and it's even true of countries. And so I believe that we have to incorporate into the way we operate elements of accountability so that parties who are doing harmful things can be held to account. By the way, that requires international cooperation because the internet is global in scope, and all of you know that the packets that flow through the internet are insensitive to international boundaries. It was designed that way deliberately, which means that victims can be in one jurisdiction and the perpetrators could be in another. And we need international cooperation, again, to achieve accountability. By agency, I simply mean that we as users should have the ability to protect ourselves and to call for help if we need it. And so those two things, accountability and agency, are very important elements. On top of all that, especially for the non-commercial users, affordability is a very important item. Because we're non-commercial, that means that we don't always have the same facility to pay for access to the internet and its applications. And so that's an important element that needs to be part of our consideration. Some of you will have heard my story that I sometimes think we should invent an internet driver's license. I don't really mean that you have to be issued a license to use the internet, but many of you will know that before we give young people keys to the car, in most countries there's some training that's required so that these young people can show us that they understand the rules of the road. And in a sense, we should be training people to know what the rules of the internet road are and be assured that they know how to behave properly and safely in an online environment. And that the analogy here is an internet driver's license. The broader objective for us, of course, is human rights protection in the online space as well as in the physical space. Those two protections should be essentially the same. We should protect human rights wherever they are potentially threatened. Among the things that can help us achieve these objectives, I would say that strong authentication and provenance are two very important elements. So what do I mean by that? We need to be able to authenticate sources. We need to be able to authenticate parties in a strong way so that we know with whom we are dealing, so that we know where information has come from. That helps us evaluate its quality and its utility. So tools that allow us to achieve strong authentication and provenance would be very helpful in the context of non-commercial user access to the internet. There are technologies that can help us in this mission. The Hypertext Transport Protocol secure version, HTTPS, the Domain Name System Security Mechanism, DNSSEC, the Border Gateway Protocol Security, BGPSEC, are among the various mechanisms that can help us achieve more safe and secure environments. By the way, I'd like to draw a distinction between security and safety. Just because something is secure doesn't necessarily mean it's safe. A classic example of this would be a highly secure electronic mail system, which encrypts the traffic while it's in transit. It gets decrypted at the end, and there's a phishing message waiting for you to trap you. So we need to attend to both of them, both privacy and security, as well as safety. One of the ways to make ourselves safer is to take account of where software comes from. After all, this entire system is based on software. And people who are building products and services, whether it's IoT, Internet of Things devices, or an application on the World Wide Web, will often turn to open source software. For one reason, it's inexpensive. It's essentially free. And that makes it convenient to use. The problem is that sometimes open source software is not very well supported. There might be just one individual who's contributed his or her software, but isn't in a position to maintain it over a long period of time. Why is that an issue? Well, often the fact that it's open source doesn't necessarily mean that it's bug-free. And in fact, often open source has vulnerabilities in it. And so one of the things that we need to remember is that when we're using open source, we should scrutinize it for potential vulnerabilities and evaluate it with that in mind. So let us not use open source blindly. Let's use it with some degree of care. With regard to the general utility of the internet and assessing its utility, yesterday I participated in a UNESCO meeting here at the IGF, And they drew attention to what they call the Internet Universality Indicators, or IUIs. They started out with a quite lengthy list of metrics that could be applied to the Internet to assess its utility. And they have compressed that number of metrics to a smaller number to make it a little easier for countries or parties to evaluate Internet access. I would say that the non-commercial users group should look to those Internet utility or universality indicators and consider exercising them to evaluate the Internet service that we are all getting. I can't overemphasize reliability as an element of utility in the Internet. Any of you who are heavy users of the Internet will know that when it doesn't work, you have potential cascade failures. For example, you want to log in to get to your email, but your mobile has to give you a second factor for authentication. That's security at work. Except your mobile isn't working because the battery is dead or is broken, or maybe you didn't get a signal. So you can't get logged into your email, and that means you can't get the message that you needed in order to keep your company going, and suddenly you go bankrupt. That's an extreme case of cascade failure, but you should all be aware that we are increasingly dependent on Internet services for our daily work and living, and reliability becomes increasingly important. Finally, I just came away from the Policy Network on Meaningful Access, and I would like to urge the non-commercial users to participate with and collaborate with the PNMA. Their work goes on during the course of the year, and I think it's very important for IGF to have a continued activity during the course of the year leading up to the annual meetings and leading up to the national and regional meetings. So let me stop there. I hope I haven't bored you to death. I just want to emphasize how important your work is to all of us who care about Internet as a useful tool for our daily living and working. So Pedro, I return the floor to you, I think.
Thanks, Vince. Just let me check here with, I would first of all, thanks for this overview on the safety issues and priorities that the non-commercials should have as a group and as a stakeholder group mostly. I think as to maintain the alternation between online and on-site audience, we can speakers. Sorry, we can go back to Bruna Santos. Bruna, would you like to take up the mic?
Yes, Pedro, thank you. Just as a note, I'm joining this session as part of the GNSO community, right? And as a member of the NCSG, but also a member of the MAG. And together with Vint, we have been working for this year's IGF and shaping some messages around, the broader and the next steps around the WSIS plus 20 review, IGF mandate renewal, and many other things. But going to the first question, I think I would start by saying that the main role of non-commercial entities or speakers is to make noise, right? As good advocates for topics and themes, I do believe that we are looking at a stakeholder group that unfortunately sometimes we need to shout even louder to be heard, and we need to shout in a very precise and direct way about what are the harms, what are the issues affecting us, and so on. And that's because we don't hold business interests, we don't hold original competence for policy making. We are participants in the process, right? And the shouting loud part, it also entails convincing governments to hear to civil society voices. It entails that we need to talk to business and the private sector about our concerns around product development and some issues that might arise from the implementation of new technologies. And we need to keep on doing that just so that the problems continue to be solved and so on. So I do think that besides shouting loud, I do see civil society or non-commercial entities with a very good and relevant oversight role, right, in which we do help each and every stakeholder to keep in checks with their mission and to make sure that no product or policy developed in this space, and especially for ensuring a safe internet, would result in human rights violations, would result in internet fragmentation or fragmentation of the user experience in general, right? So I'll stop now, but just so for us to keep continuing the panel and so on, but just to summarize in that way, shouting loud and like making sure every single stakeholder is in check with their mission. Thanks.
Thank you, Vent, for your speech, and thank you, Bruna, for your comments. Our next speaker is Dr. Manal Abdussamad, a distinguished leader with over 27 years of expertise in public policy, governance, and digital transformation. Dr. Manal served as Lebanon Minister of Information, where she led effort to enhance transparency, digitize public resource. Dr. Manal also held the senior role at Lebanese Ministry of Finance. Her contribution extends to Saudi Arabia, where she implemented advanced automated systems to improve governance and sustainability. Dr. Manal's dedication make her a virtual voice in today's digital transformation. The speech for you.
Thank you, Amin, and I'm glad to speak here at the IGF and to participate. And thank you for the invitation. I'll start where Vint Cerf has ended. He mentioned about the internet driver's license. I like the idea about human rights protection and reliability and mainly accountability. The main issue is that every one of us is accountable of what we receive and what we share, because sharing is also a responsibility, not only writing our own posts. The new business model has changed, and it's not about receiving content like TV, like newspaper, like radio. Now we are participating in the content. We are creating value in the content. So everything definitely will influence the community and will influence the internet world. So new readers now interact, they put likes, they put comments, they put reviews, and this definitely can influence a program, a journalist, an idea, a media outlet. They can influence also the visibility of these outlets. Drawing from my experience as Minister of Information in Lebanon, I have witnessed transformative power of the digital technology in advancing some of the most pressing challenges of our time. And I think by that time we had the major crises that hit Lebanon. We had COVID-19, we had the Beirut explosion, and we had the economic crisis, and these were unprecedented events and crises. In these moments, we turned to digital platforms. What we couldn't do in decades, we managed to do in few months, and this is also very important. We fostered public participation, transparency, and we tried to deliver wide information to citizens. Also, this is very interesting, in collaboration with the UNDP, also I partnered with UNDP, WHO, UNICEF, and we tried to create some awareness to the public by, we had a hashtag, take care before you share. Take care before you share. This is by UNDP, and this is mainly draws the importance of being accountable not only by receiving the content, but also by spreading the content. And we all know that we are all influencers. So if anyone shares, for example, a message, a WhatsApp to someone else, these people will trust the message because it's coming from you, not because they read it even. So sometimes they share the message from you without reading it, and here we definitely can create some issues if we are not responsible. I believe I will conclude with 3 critical areas where users, and here I'm talking about non-commercial users, they should engage meaningfully in the world of internet. First of all, awareness and education. knowledge is power. So users must educate themselves on safety, on digital rights, on impact of misinformation and disinformation. And definitely you should know the difference between misinformation, which is unintentional behavior, and disinformation when we manipulate news, so it's intentional. And also the second point where users or non-commercial users engage is the advocacy and collective action. Communities can unite to advocate for stronger policies and protecting privacy, combating cyber threats, ensuring net neutrality. And here we all know about the lobbying that we have by, for example, digital petitions or grassroots campaigns. These also can amplify the voice of non-commercial users. The third critical issue where users are engaged is the participation in governance. So, basically we have the governance from one side, from the government, from the cabinet, from the parliament. Nobody is engaged. Now we believe that people, they have the power to be engaged in public policy, so they can contribute to policy discussion. They can ensure digital policies reflect diverse needs, not just those of the government or those of the commercial entities. And beyond Lebanon, I have Giga projects experience where also I will share later if we have time. Let me conclude by emphasizing that a safe and empowering internet requires that active participation of everyone is needed, especially non-commercial users, because these ones, as I mentioned, are very accountable and responsible nowadays. Their voices and actions are critical in championing an internet that is secure, that is inclusive, and here we mean mainly the vulnerable people. We have to protect them by some digital literacy, and definitely bridging the digital gap. And internet, in this case, can ensure the good for everybody of us. Thank you again for this opportunity. Thank you, Amin, and back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Manar, for your speech. And our next speaker is Farzan Abadi. Additionally, she's founder of Digital Medusa. I don't know what to say about Farzana. Farzana have a lot of active thing in digital right and policy and of internet policy. I follow her in many working group. We do it together in ICANN and other part. I will give you to the speech, Farzana, to tell us about.
Thank you, Amin. Thank you so much for the invitation. And so, as Amin mentioned, I have been involved with internet infrastructure and the governance aspect of it, as well as human rights and digital rights for the past, for over 15 years. But also I have worked a lot on issues such as digital trust and safety. And I can call myself an ICANN veteran now. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, but I've been involved with the processes since I was young, and a member of the non-commercial stakeholder group and non-commercial users constituency. And I can tell you a little bit about the evolution of how the non-commercial users' interest and participation was affected, how they were empowered or how they were disempowered during these processes, and why it's so important to have this voice in, especially in multi-stakeholder processes. And I really appreciate Dr. Manal and also Vint and Bruna's interventions, and it is very refreshing to hear about the importance of digital literacy these days, that we are just going down the lane of regulation after regulation and leaving people behind. So we argue that the internet is for everyone. So should be safety. So when we provide meaningful connectivity for people, we should also keep them safe online. And that is, of course, challenging. But also the means that we use in order to keep them safe should not affect and diminish their online presence. It should not affect their human rights. We should not, in order to keep them safe, we should not get rid of encryption. In order to keep them safe, we should not have unaccountable processes. And one of the role that non-commercial users have, they have a very multifaceted approach to safety and access to the internet. They use various frameworks in order to provide like that advocacy. Like, for example, they use human rights approaches to evaluate whether governance processes on the internet work, and whether that affects safety and accessibility of the internet. They also, unlike governments and nation states, civil society's work is usually global and it transcends borders. So it doesn't matter if you're a user sitting in Kabul or in Brussels. Your safety and your access to the internet is a matter of importance to the non-commercial users. And non-commercial users, I should have mentioned this, non-commercial users usually consist of civil society organizations, but we also have technical operators that truly care about human rights and meaningful connectivity, and they are not for profit, and they join us in these efforts. Also, any process that claims to be multi-stakeholder must have the non-commercial and civil society organization in its processes, because otherwise it won't be that much different from bilateral and multilateral processes or public-private partnerships. And to some extent, civil society organizations and non-commercial users might not use the tried and tested punitive measures that law enforcement agencies and others used in order to bring public safety, but affected many human rights. And punitive measures that can have devastating effects on various aspects of digital governance, including access to the internet, including security and safety of the internet. And I can tell you a little bit about what NCUC does and what we do at NCSG and our successes, but I think that could feed into your final question. So I just stop now. We can discuss that later.
Thank you, Farzana. And we will move now to our next speaker, Dr. Milad Sabali. He's managing director of global learning and the Middle East leader in e-learning solution. He has played a key role in shaping the face of virtual education, as we know it today in the Middle East. As an international figure in the area of AI, robotics, and automation, and digital transformation and technology-enabled learning. And the fingerprint of Dr. Milad was and continue in different sides in our region, in Saudi Arabia, and in all the region and internationally. I will give you the speech, Doctor.
Thank you very much, and good morning for everyone. In addition to what has been covered by the colleagues, I would like to shed a light on the local aspects of this global trend of policy development by various people. As my Farzana just mentioned, that the policies that are developed globally can benefit other people in other places, but it's not always the case. And there are three aspects that I would like to highlight based on our actual problems in the past 25 years in implementing solutions that are relying on the internet, specifically in education and human resource development or professional upskilling and reskilling and so on in different areas, covering types of non-commercial users, including marginalized people or even refugees. And we had to face a lot of issues in the past 15 years probably or more in different Arab countries, and the tendency was that underprivileged people should not have a solution that's based on technology. And our hypothesis since more than 20 years is that technology is not only for rich people or for advanced countries, but it can also provide efficient solutions in different, including places with war or whatever. So the three areas I would like to highlight based on this, and later we can go into more details, are some of them have been covered, but I would like to talk about them from a different angle. Privacy, for example, privacy, equity, and accountability. Accountability covered from a certain angle. I would like to cover from a private as well as governmental for different areas. But first, let me start with privacy, where of course we need advocacy for stronger privacy policies. We've been governments jumping into all kinds of new technologies and regulations without having the right policies in place. Many times some policies have been copied pasted. Can you hear me, or it's
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so okay, so maybe now this is better. So strong privacy laws in different countries are badly needed. There are some international standards like GDPR or others, but we don't have such things in different places in the world, and we have to take into consideration the local cultural sensitivities when we do that. Also, privacy tools and different types of available tools, as it was mentioned before, many people would go for open source because of affordability, but many times this is not 100% safe. Also, surveillance. I mean, we have seen a lot of surveillance efforts in the region by governments or even by internet providers, and those all the way to using tools like Pegasus spyware to see what people are doing and so on. And this is affecting human rights and freedom of speech sometimes. Also, as Dr. Manal mentioned, we need to educate people about their digital rights. Sometimes we take it for granted that people know what they want, and therefore we ask for non-commercial users to be to have a major role in developing policies or drafting new policies or whatever, while they are way behind. Many people, especially in underprivileged places and in different countries, they are way behind what we expect them to be doing. So capacity building and education is a major point. Another very important point is equity. And this is, again, digital divide is not only about accessibility of the internet, which is still a very important point, especially in areas like war areas or refugees. In the region, we had millions of refugees. When we started talking about educating refugees, the only method that UNICEF and other international organizations know is to bring them to physical places and teach them in conventional ways. When we said, let's go for some kind of blended or online or AI-based modern technology to reach out to these people and to have this kind of individualized solutions for them, it was very new even for international organizations. And so many times the local development or innovation is by far more advanced and flexible than archaic international solutions that are repeated everywhere, copied and pasted from one region to another. And this is another area when we talk about policy, you have to take into consideration that it's not what has been decided in advanced countries that this is the policy that goes everywhere. So local is more important in many other areas, especially that when we go to some kind of multilingual access or even freedom of expression and so on, we have to, and the access of the end user, even students or other underprivileged people to different types of content. It's not only to block some kind of content for cultural sensitivities, but also to allow, as Dr. Manal said, to amplify the opinion and innovation or creativity that is done at the local level by such non-commercial users. At the accountability, I'll just highlight a few things. One is that transparency reports are lacking in many in many corporations or governments in the region. How data is collected, where is it stored, and how it is shared, and who has the access to share, who has the right to access it. There is a lack of independent audits, and the policies, sometimes they mention, sometimes they don't mention this. And nowadays, in the last 2-3 years, when AI became a major tool in the digital transformation, and even digital literacy is now more of an AI literacy as well. So there is a need for local AI ethics frameworks, not just copy the UNESCO framework, which means nothing in many of our countries. And you need to develop some local flavor, taking into consideration cultural sensitivities as well as the actual situation on the ground in terms of infrastructure, access, and all this stuff. And finally, there is a need for surveillance accountability by corporates or by governments who do different types of surveillance that we don't know what they're doing. And suddenly we discover after some time that millions, hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent to control what people say or to gauge what people say on social media and so on. So this is a brief of our experience. I can talk more about the educational part or our other practical experience if we have time.
Thank you, Dr. Milad. When Bruna started to talk, we don't introduce her very well, I think, but we work together with Bruna on several sides, and as she mentioned, she's ICANN JNSO counselor, and she's also an IGF MAG member, and also Bruna have a lot of active work in internet policy, and I have a question for Bruna. It's about how can the NCUC and its partner advocate for equitable and inclusive internet governance that respect freedom and expression while countering the overreach of both state and non-state actors in cyberspace? Please.
Thank you. And I'm a bit appalled by the conversation in the chat on how civil society can undermine efforts. I don't think that's the case, to be fair, but I just wanted to put this on the record. Going back to the question, I think I'd like to start maybe by stating that we really live in unprecedented times, right? Where just not the discussions about internet governance, but also our spaces, the IGF, ICANN, some of our spaces have been challenged by governments, their interest in this conversation, other stakeholders, and also other processes taking place around the globe. In 2024, we have seen challenging processes like elections in more than 80 countries, and also some threats regarding the duplication or fragmentation of spaces where internet governance discussions take place. And this has all been shifting towards different approaches or different ideas about what's the ideal approach to internet regulation, what's the ideal approach to internet policymaking, and I think that's one of the main challenges we need to tackle, and I'm very glad to hear some of the interventions about these points. In light of that, I think that some of the challenges are things in CUC and NCSG can also help work on and talk to. Would be, first of all, promoting multi-stakeholder governance framework, right? It's our key role to engage in these spaces and make sure that all voices are heard in this space. And I'm not just talking about ICANN, I'm talking about Net Mundial Plus 10 with its guidelines. I'm talking about engaging in IETF, ITU, and any kind of space that addresses internet governance by any mean or in any kind of surface way. And by doing so, I do believe that non-commercial users, they need to also advocate for more transparency and accountability, and that our participation in this for us is at the same kind of level or in some acknowledgeable level to other stakeholders. What we saw in the GDC process with the sidetracking of the technical community, civil society voices was definitely concerning, but that happened despite our complaints and despite our points about the process. Another thing I think non-commercial users can do, and NCUC has been doing a lot, is to challenge overreach in content regulation. We are really strong advocates. Farzani is one of them at ICANN mostly, where every single time that stakeholder groups within the space try to advocate for more content regulation, we are kind of the ones that keep like raising the flag of we don't do content in the space. But besides ICANN, it's just really relevant that any sort of policy approach is human-centered, transparent, and applicable. Besides all, and that we also have proportional state actions and proportional state actions that have civil society and academia concerns in mind. Other than that, I would say that advocating for corporate accountability is something that's really high and should continue to happen. And by that, I mean pressuring private intermediaries and our registries and registrars colleagues within ICANN to adopt due process mechanisms, human rights-based approach, human rights impact assessments, or anything that can help assess the type of policymaking they can do. That comes aligned with defending freedom of expression in the DNS ecosystem. That's something we have been really keen on. But also going back to the points addressed by other panelists, I'd say that supporting digital inclusion and equity and also educating and empowering stakeholders is a key and a core aspect of our mission, because there is a lot of capacity building civil society folks and groups can do, and also to provide for more spaces for other organizations to come in and other organizations to also be more well experienced within ICANN. And I would maybe just close by saying that there's definitely not a one-size-fits-all kind of measures for this question, as we still face a lot of discrepancies on how states approach the broader idea of safeguarding users and ensuring human rights online. Unfortunately, we don't live yet in a world where we can simply ask for regulations, because it goes both ways, right? In my country, Brazil, it can come in order to safeguard human rights and make sure everyone has access to the internet. But unfortunately, in some regions of the world, it also talks about using transparency regulations to surveil users or to ask for companies to share data with governments under like unlawful or a little bit abusive requests on that sense. But I do believe that the power of advocacy and civil society can be a main tool for making sure we reach a safer online space and in hearing the voices of users. But this conversation doesn't go anywhere if we don't address the voices of the victims, and that these are the ones who gets their rights violated. These are the ones who have, you know, their private lives shared on social media, are victims of deepfakes or anything like that. So I do believe we have a lot of work to do in including more and more voices. But above all, the victims are also relevant in this conversation. So I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you, Bruna. I will give the turn now to Pedro to if there are someone online or any comment. I see comments now.
We don't have exactly a comment. We have a conversation going on about encryption, privacy, and the possibility of attenuating privacy mechanisms, encryption mechanisms, as to make it easier to prosecute some citizen or other crimes online. And I think considering that Farzina is participating in the conversation, if she would like to talk a little bit about this issue regarding lower or higher levels of encryptions and how non-commercial interests are involved in this kind of conversation. So please, Farz, you have the floor.
Pedro, that's a very this is a topic that we've been discussing for a very long time, and I think that's I don't think time would allow. But let me tell you a little bit about what we do for privacy at non-commercial users constituency. So as you know, non-commercial users constituency is a part of ICANN governance. And for a long time, we had the domain name registrants, sensitive and private data out in the public. And anybody could have an access through WHOIS to the domain name registrants data. And one of the, so as NCUC, we were advocating for privacy, but we were not advocating for just redacting the data or not collecting the data. We were saying that don't make this public. If you need access, have accountable disclosure policy processes in place in order to have access to it. So, and this is, and we were not too successful in bringing privacy to domain name registrants until GDPR happened. And then after that, we managed to advocate for privacy for every domain name registrant in the world, which to some extent happened. And we claim that as a win for us and as a success. But another thing that we should be cognizant of is that when, like, many of our members, many of the non-commercial users, many of the organizations work on these safety issues. They work on online safety. It doesn't mean when they advocate for privacy, when they advocate for freedom of expression, when they advocate for strong encryption, it does not mean that they don't work on trust and safety, the problems that that information integrity and other issues are being raised online. So, but we are of a, like, we have a position that we need privacy globally for everybody. We need a strong encryption. And when we want to bring safety, those principles should not be undermined, because then we are not bringing safety to the internet and internet users. I'm sorry, I didn't address the whole encryption thing. But I think that can be a segue to talking about how can we actually not undermine privacy and security of the users online, but bring safety as well. And I think one way is by coming up with alternative solutions. Alternative solutions, not to encryption, but alternative solutions to how are we going to combat CSAM? How are we going to combat content moderation issues? Thank you.
Amin, want me to take back the floor? We have a question of Ran Mohan to, I think, our panelists. He made a question about if you panelists would consider that greater encryption is a leading cause of a less safe internet. I would also like, if you are interested in contribution to that discussion, since I'm seeing that there are comments in the chat, Vint, about the encryption challenges and other challenges regarding non-commercial interests that may arise globally that we need to halt or we need to deal with to ensure safe internet. We would like to hear your contribution on that issues as well, be it encryption or other challenges that we're facing nowadays that are important on a global level. So, Vince, I would like to give the floor back to you.
Well, thank you. I've just been trying to track the conversation in the chat as well as the online audible discussion. It seems to me that encryption is a really important tool, and for people and organizations that need to protect information, I think we can't escape from the utility and value of cryptography. At the same time, though, I think we also have to remember that sometimes we have to be able to pierce the veil of anonymity, if you like, in order to assure accountability. I would observe that law enforcement, although some members of that community say that encryption is somehow harmful to safety, many of them seem to have found ways of dealing with bad behaviors despite the existence of cryptography. And so I would encourage an argument along the lines of alternatives to things like backdoors and so on in order to deal with accountability and law enforcement. Sometimes cooperation helps. Sometimes, frankly, penetration of some of the groups that are doing harmful things online, like ransomware, turns out to be more effective than trying to eliminate cryptography, which has all kinds of side effects with regard to safety and security. I think there are others who are online right now that might speak to this as well, but I leave that to your discretion.
Amin, I will get back to you. I would just like to read two comments, one comment and one question from Benjamin. Benjamin concurred with Dr. Millar's views on the need to have local flavor internet digital governance frameworks and about the necessity of having local approaches in different countries, which may enter in contradiction to global frameworks sometimes. And there was a specific question on how do we have meaningful non-commercial participants if we have limited capacity in the non-commercial community. But before going back to you, I see that Farzi has her hands up, so I would like to get the floor back to her, and then going back on site.
Thank you, Sarah Pedro. I just wanted to quickly mention that. So anonymity is very important for some vulnerable communities. This is how they got their voice heard. In the beginning, when the internet was this place that they could, without having to mention their religion, their identity, their name, they could join online communities. And I truly believe that the pioneers of the internet, including Vint, had this vision of everyone, for everyone to have access to the internet, regardless of where they are from. And that's what made the internet this powerful tool. And and I believe that we should still preserve anonymity. And in our accountability conversations, we have to focus on, instead of looking at identification of users, I think that we should also look at holding law enforcement accountable. Sometimes law enforcement is a human rights violator. And one of the things that I wanted to tell you that briefly about NCUC and NCSG, what we have done, and it's a small role, but we have actually worked with the Government Advisory Committee to discuss how we can come up with authentication for law enforcement, and also how we can report on the request for access to people's registration data how we can bring that transparency so that we can actually provide some sort of accountability for law enforcement as well. This is why the voice of non-commercial is so important, because they can bring these nuances that, yes, law enforcement is great, but some law enforcement agencies are actually intend to violate human rights. Thank you, and I see Vince's hand is up. I was not trying to misframe anything, Vince, just to be clear.
Look, it's Vint again. Look, there are lots of arguments on either side of this equation. Absolute anonymity, however, feels to me like overreach. I absolutely understand and agree with the points made that for some people, being able to speak and to be anonymous in that speech is necessary, because without that, they face potential serious consequences. However, I believe we still have to maintain that the veil of anonymity has to be pierceable under the right circumstances. Without that capacity, we have a great difficulty dealing with accountability. You'll notice that in some reporting mechanisms where anonymous reports are accepted, sometimes the party to whom that report is made needs to know whether or not the reporting party is legitimate or not, but is held to account to protect the anonymity of that reporting party. You'll find reporters, for example, who even go to jail in order to protect their sources, but in order for them to know whether the source is legitimate, sometimes they have to know who that source is. This is not a trivial matter, and it's not an easy matter, and there are tensions in both directions, but I am now finding myself leaning towards accountability, because in its absence, I don't know how to protect people from harm.
Thanks, Paris and Vin, for the interaction. I mean, there is the question about Benjamin, about just let me get back here, about the participation of non-commercial. There isn't enough space, there's the limited capacity by the non-commercial community in the governance spaces, but I would believe that this would be a question for on-site speakers, and it would also be nice to collect some questions from the on-site audience. So, I mean, back to you. Okay. To check with our speakers on site.
Okay. Thank you, Pedro. Before I come back to our speaker here, I will give. I see a lot of colleagues interesting to add their valuable input. I will start by Charles, please.
Thank you, Amin, and thank you for having us as commercial with you. We are, of course, I'm Charles Shaban from the International Trademark Association, and I liked what Farjana is laughing. Okay, I liked what to start with what Vint mentioned when he started talking. He talked that he's talking about all the internet users, and this is very important. And going back to Farjana when she mentioned that. It is important to have the privacy. I agree with her, but of course I liked when she said we need a procedure to know who's behind it. As again, Dr. Manal and Vint mentioned it again, sometimes total anonymity is not really good, because you cannot know if it's someone, let's say, criminal behind it. Is it related to disinformation, as Dr. Manal mentioned? So this is why I think it's important to cover it from many sides, and especially when going to the ICANN, who is, for example, it was a good move to have the, let's say, the private information to be hidden, but I don't think it's important to hide, for example, who is the company around responsible for this domain or something. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that it's a conversation for sure, needs a lot of talk, but in general it needs the different views from all the stakeholders to be sure we reach, I think, what's needed for everyone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, please.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. My name is Andrew Campling. I'm sort of mainly in the tech community, but I'm also a trustee of the Internet Watch Foundation, which is in civil society. I think I completely agree with Vince's point about being able to pierce the veil on anonymity in appropriate circumstances, and dare I say, absolute anonymity, absolute privacy takes us to the dark web, and we only have to look there to see why we don't want to go there. That's not the right destination, but it seems to be the path that some of us have us set on if we're not careful. But if I may pose just two brief questions, how can we avoid continuing the weaponization of privacy, which in reality is mainly the privacy of adults, when it's a qualified right, overriding all of the human rights of children, leading to an explosion in child sex abuse material, sexploitation, etc. And how can we ensure, for example, that domain name registration data includes the details of real owners, which can be stored privately, only accessible in limited circumstances to law enforcement agencies. And data shows us that effective know your customer efforts lead to significant reductions in DNS abuse. And so if we don't know who the owners of the domain name are, we do see significant abuse, DNS abuse arising from it. So I don't know if any of the panel would like to respond to either of those points. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I give
just a note? Bruna has her hands up.
Ah, okay. Sorry.
Just very briefly, I think it's really dangerous to place the discussion about privacy as weaponization of privacy, especially when you have journalists getting arrested for exercising their, profession, when you have civil society and activists getting killed, getting murdered in a lot of parts of the world, when you have female journalists being attacked on X and many other social media platforms for simply reporting on elections. I come from Brazil. Brazil in the last years has been skyrocketing in terms of gender-based attacks to female journalists, female politicians, queer politicians, and in that sense. So I do see privacy as a core aspect of a safe internet and as a core aspect of these discussions. When we address privacy as a right, I'm not saying by any means that I want the criminals to have privacy, or I'm not saying by any means that I want the criminals to, use aliases on the internet. I'm just saying that a lot of users, they do rely on this as a tool to exercise their jobs, to feel safer online, or to simply, work on the details of a protest against Bolsonaro, because that's what happened in my country, right? And right to protest, right to, freedom of expressions, they both need to be aligned with the right to privacy, or the needs to fight crime, or the needs for law enforcement agencies to work. And it's not, one size is not more important than the other. We need to advocate for all of it more broadly, and not just for the law enforcement agents to work. I also need my rights to be able to go to a protest and feel safe, or to be able to go, anywhere and feel safe in that sense. So I just wanted to reply on that point, because I honestly, as a proper civil rights advocate, I dislike the idea of privacy weaponization.
Thank you. Can I next, please?
Hello. My name is Robert Carolina. I'm General Counsel with Internet Systems Consortium. We're a root server operator. In that capacity, I think there's really nothing of value I can add to the discussion. So instead, I'm going to shift to what I do with part of my time. I'm a senior teaching fellow in legal and regulatory aspects of cybersecurity with Royal Holloway University of London. I think there's been a great deal of ventilation about the tension between accountability and privacy, so I won't pile onto that as much as I would enjoy it. I think instead I'd like to ask a question about Vince Cerf's other key challenge that he led with, which is agency. Specifically, I'm wondering to what extent we can or should focus more on protecting vulnerable populations. And I think I should be, in this context, I should be much more clear what I mean by vulnerable populations. I'm not speaking here about people who are vulnerable by reason of their political or sexual or religious identity. I'm speaking here about people who have become vulnerable because of an ongoing diminishment of their ability to think clearly. I'm thinking here about aging population or people who have come under some type of mental cloud because of health issues. And what we've seen is an explosion of predation upon that type of vulnerable population through phishing campaigns and similar online crimes. And when thinking about that population, people who've had life savings stolen, who've had significant amounts of their retirement taken from them through criminal activity, I think it's extremely difficult to solve problems like that through the normal tools that we use to instill agencies such as better education. I think that's a false horizon. I'm wondering what else can be done to assist that group to reduce that kind of predation. And now I am going to be quite difficult by suggesting that whatever the answer is, I would suggest to you that the answer is not increased law enforcement cooperation on a multinational basis. And the reason I suggest that is because if we look at where the criminals are often located, asking the law enforcement officials of a, let's say, less developed economy whose primary job is to solve crimes that have local victims, I think it's unlikely that one could ever get the type of cooperation that would be effective at a mass level. So if that's off the table, and perhaps you'll disagree, then what else is there that we can do to assist or to try to interdict that kind of predation on that kind of vulnerable community?
So on the presumption that that question might have been aimed at me, among others, let me say that accountability does loom large in my mind as you describe that scenario. If we're unable to identify the source of a phishing attack, I don't quite know how we will deal with the bad behavior. At Google, as you might know, we try very hard to filter as much as we can of the incoming email if we can detect that it's a phishing attack or some other malicious content. Maybe it's got malware as an attachment, for instance. And the only reason we can do that is that we have such a large population of users that we can see a lot of the phishing content flowing into the system. We can identify it and try to filter it out into the spam folders. That's one kind of response, which is just to try to detect and remove it. But if you want to go after the parties who are generating these attacks, I don't know how you do that without some ability to pierce anonymity and to, frankly, try to get cooperation from which is what the Budapest Convention and the more recent cybercrime treaty, I think, have attempted to facilitate, which is cooperation. I don't disagree with your point, however, that it may not be effective if the law enforcement component doesn't have the capacity to respond. So I don't really have a comfortable answer to your question, not a pointed response. But I think that we have to keep thinking in the back of our minds that accountability is our only real tool for dealing with bad behavior.
Thank you, Robert. I think you raised a very important issue. It's about vulnerability and how we protect vulnerable people In my point of view, definitely technology should empower more than marginalize. So here, if we will not go international, let's go local. Locally, I think the major issue is to empower people, educate people so that they know what they are reading, how they are acting, and the main I think action that everybody should take, and specifically the policymakers, is to collaborate and cooperate. Collaborate not only with the regulators. The regulators should collaborate with operators, with Google, with Facebook, with every company or every organization that are engaged in the internet governance. We should collaborate also with NGOs to spread awareness, and this is what I did during my tenure as Minister of Information. I partnered with Twitter, with X, with the Facebook, with every platform, so that we ensure that we talk in a language that is acceptable. And the most important issue, we have to spread awareness or literacy based on the country that we are working in, because different countries have different cultures, have different languages. So we have definitely to take in consideration the culture of the country. I have to tell Facebook and to tell Google and to tell these platforms that we have our own culture. You have to protect our culture by certain also standards, not only your own standards. So this is very important, the cooperation and collaboration, and education comes on top. Thank you.
I would like to tell you a story that happened to me in one of the advanced Arab countries. And it's not about only specific type of users. Some international hackers have been and are still able to hack the digital identity of that country, which is usually used for the government to talk to citizens or to people with residency. And they contacted me and they started taking, they said, they impersonated the police. They said, we are from this police department and we would like to double check your KYC and identity and so on. And then at some point he said, what's your account number, bank account number? And I stopped there. And later on, 1 week, and I called the police and they said, did they take your money from the bank? I said, no. He said, it's okay, just forget it. The next week, 1 week after, a friend of mine in another country, in another city of the same country, lost around $150,000 from her account because she did not stop at that. She thought that, I mean, the government is asking her for some information to update her information. And she's a top manager level, but she's not well into technology. I think in addition to all what has been discussed, maybe at some point in time we need some kind of insurance or reinsurance on the data loss. Because if you want just to rely on centralized decision or police or international collaboration, it might not be sufficient. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Milad. We have a few minutes before we close the session, and I'm very interested to listen and turn for our speaker as conclusion. I want to say something that time run, but we will not let this discussion run from us. We will continue and we build on this discussion. And this is the main reason why we think to make this session, because we don't want to focus about a problem we have as non-commercial user. More, this session is focusing about the rule we already make it as non-commercial user, especially in NCOC. And we are looking forward to this discussion to continue and to build on for continue the stability and security of the internet. I will make a turn from Dr. Manal to conclude this, and I want to thank all who attend with us in present or online. Your valuable input and your support is very countable for us. Thank you again.
Thank you,
Manal, please.
Amin, also for inviting me. I also want to emphasize that as we deliberate on the future of the internet governance, we must prioritize inclusivity, particularly for vulnerable populations, and here population also differs from country to country. This means bridging the digital divide, trying to enhance cybersecurity, trying to promote digital literacy. This is very important. Also, literacy is subjective, and ensuring that technology empowers rather than marginalizes. And I conclude also by emphasizing that a safe and empowering internet requires the active contribution and the active participation of everyone, including the non-commercial users. Their voices and their actions are critical in championing an internet that is secure, that is inclusive, and a force for good. Thank you.
Please, Bruna.
Yeah. I think maybe I'll start with Vince's point on the chat about the balance between safety and privacy not being a static matter. I do agree with that in general, because I think it's one of the things I was kind of referring to in the beginning, right? We do have different approaches to many of these issues we have discussed, whether it's encryption or, any other need for anonymity tools for anyone that feels threatened online to simply exist and perform their jobs. And we also have business interests and governmental interests, and each and every single one of those, it's initially legitimate, right? What's not legitimate in my mind, it's the abuse. And whether it's the abuse coming from governmental requests for access to data, or the abuse from law enforcement for further identification of users and so on. And I think the main challenge within this and any other internet governance discussion is to find the common point, right? What's the point we can compromise with, and that won't result in any violations to users' rights or violations to the way the internet is supposed to work or to the core aspects of the internet in that sense. So maybe I'll close with that and just adding a +1 to your point, Vint.
Thank you, Bruna. Turn to Vant, please.
Well, I've had more than my fair share of airtime. I will say, though, that this discussion has been very helpful to me because it sheds light on a variety of different situations that put this whole question of privacy and anonymity and accountability and agency into a kind of dynamic discourse. I have the feeling that we will never end up with an absolute solution to this problem, that we will find ourselves oscillating around some point that mostly seems to protect people from harm, but sometimes ends up in abuses that we failed to prevent. And I hate saying that, but I'm afraid that it's probably realistic to recognize that we will not achieve perfection. What we want to do, of course, is to minimize harm in all of its potential guises in this online environment. And there are a number of different tools that we can use to achieve that objective.
Thank you again, Vant. Now the turn to Dr. Milad.
Yes, I would like to close by highlighting again the importance of having a balance between what's local and what's global in terms of policy and solutions. And here I would like to highlight 3 levels. One is the infrastructure level in any country. All this discussion is highly affected by how advanced the infrastructure is, and therefore what are the plans to develop this in order to provide equity and access to all kinds of people. Second, the data. When we talk about privacy and the rights, and digital rights and so on, what about the access of the data? Where is the data hosted? For example, in many countries, the governments have policies not to host the data outside the country. and this creates additional threat. And the third level is the content, which sometimes we disregard, especially nowadays with the AI available tools that can create any kind of content. And in this sense, it's both ways. It's not only preventing people from voicing out certain opinions, but also what people, especially underprivileged or even younger generation and so on, can access from international available content. And this here there is a need for balance between some kind of surveillance and local cultural sensitivities. So we need to take these into consideration, and therefore, as Vince just said, there is no one size fits all, and there is a need for some local flavor into different types of policies that have a lot of things in common with the global level. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, Farda.
So I just I'm very chatty in chat, so I just believe that in order to bring safety as well as upholding those long-standing internet values such as open, free internet and keeping people safe, we need to discuss more about like whose accountability are we talking about? Is there a way to like what sort of safety issues are we tackling that needs an actual identification, and how do we actually go about that? Are we going to are we talking about getting like people asking people for their driver's licenses? Some people in some countries don't have driver's license. So these are the issues that we have to consider. And also, I don't think that, as I said in chat, I don't think that this kind of like balancing or trade-offs take us to the like yes, us closer to the solution. We have to say that, okay, so this is the policy that I have decided to come up with in a multi-stakeholder environment or however in a democratic way, and these are the implications of this policy. And then we will evaluate whether that policy is actually good for the public and for the global public, not just not just communities in certain countries. So with that, I just ended with we need safety for everyone, and we need internet for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Pedro, you can conclude from your side, please.
No, I mean, I think you can, considering the time we have, I think you can conclude now, science. But thanks. Okay. And thanks everyone for their presentations and their contributions to our discussion.
Thank you. The session is over, and we'll keep continue our effort together. Thank you. Bye.